The sky above Earth was supposed to be vast, endless, and safe. But on that fateful day, as the sun began to dip beneath the horizon, the clouds above turned a shade of violet so unnatural it seemed to hum with an otherworldly energy. People, in the streets of New York, Los Angeles, Paris, and every other city across the globe, stopped in their tracks, staring upwards. Something was coming. Something that wasn't from Earth. A deafening sound split the air, almost as if the very sky itself had cracked open. The ground trembled, and then, in an instant, a massive ship, a craft like nothing anyone had ever seen, tore through the atmosphere and landed in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean with a violent splash that sent waves crashing miles high. It was then that the world watched as the alien invasion began. From the wreckage of the ship emerged a group of towering figures. Women, but not like any human women. These beings were built like warriors, their armor gleaming in the fading light of Earth's sun. They were beautiful, terrifying, and their eyes glowed with an unnatural intensity. They looked down upon humanity, and they laughed. It wasn't a laugh of amusement, but of contempt. They saw humans as nothing more than ants, insignificant, primitive, weak. Their leader, a tall and formidable woman with silver hair and crimson eyes, spoke in a language no human could understand. But it didn't matter. The tone was unmistakable. She was mocking humanity, and then the broadcast was cut off. Jackson Moore, a 32-year-old mechanic, sat in his apartment, feet kicked up on the coffee table, scrolling through his phone when the broadcast abruptly cut. Out. He muttered a curse under his breath, annoyed by the technical glitch. But when the television came back on, it wasn't some simple news update. A cold, metallic voice echoed through every television, radio, and device on the planet. People of Earth, we are the Zitharians. We have come for your planet. Your civilization is weak. Your world is ours. Jackson's heart skipped a beat. He turned the volume up as loud as it would go, listening intently. Your leaders have no power to stop us, the voice continued. We will take your resources, your cities, and we will break your spirit. If you resist, you will suffer. If you surrender, you will be spared somewhat. The transmission ended. Silence reigned, broken only by the sound of distant sirens wailing. Jackson stared at the screen, unsure whether this was a prank, a simulation, or something far worse. But as the minutes passed, it became clear that it wasn't some hoax. The world was under threat. Humanity was facing an existential crisis, and these alien invaders were more than prepared for it. 2 days later, Jackson found himself in the middle of what could only be described as chaos. The streets were packed with people, all in a frenzy, running, shouting, some in panic, others just numb with disbelief. Military convoys rolled through the city, and fighter jets soared overhead. But it wasn't enough. The Zitharians had already proven their superiority in the skies, tearing through the military's defenses like paper. As Jackson navigated through the crowd, a sudden explosion rocked the street. People screamed and scattered in all directions. As debris rained down, he ducked behind a building, heart racing. What the hell was going on? Through the smoke, he saw them, the Zitharians. They moved with predatory grace, their alien armor reflecting the flames of burning buildings. Their weapons, sleek, glowing, and deadly, were effortlessly dispatching anyone who dared stand in their way. The sound of blaster fire echoed in. The air and the ground shook with each blast. Jackson's blood ran cold. These beings weren't just invaders. They were conquerors. He ducked deeper into the alley, his pulse quickening. His hands shook as he pulled out his phone, glancing at the emergency alerts flooding his screen. The government was urging civilians to stay indoors, but that wasn't an option for Jackson. His instincts kicked in. He had to move, he had to survive, and somehow he had to fight back. As he ran, He couldn't help but notice how calm the Zitharians seemed, almost detached. They weren't here to simply conquer, they were here to break humanity, to show the world just how powerless it was in the face of their might. But there was one thing the invaders didn't account for, one thing they hadn't expected. Jackson Moore was human, and humanity had a history of doing the impossible. Hours later, Jackson found himself in the underground bunker of a nearby resistance group that had formed in the chaos of the alien invasion. The walls were lined with monitors displaying news feeds from around the world. Most of the world's major cities had fallen, and the Zitharians were already consolidating their power. But there, in the corner of the room, was a woman who hadn't yet been seen on any screen, the alien leader herself. Her image flashed in front of them, towering and proud, her gaze filled with arrogance. A young woman who had been frantically typing away at a terminal turned to Jackson. "This is it," she said, her voice trembling. "The Zitharians are about to establish their dominance over Earth. We have no chance." Jackson shook his head. "We can't just lie down and let them take us. We have to fight back." He had no idea how. But one thing was certain, he wasn't going to give up, not without a fight. The following days were a blur of military movements, scattered pockets of resistance, and desperate attempts to communicate with other survivors. But the Zitharians, with their advanced technology, were everywhere, relentless, cold and efficient. Jackson's resolve grew with each passing hour. As the alien invaders tightened their grip, he discovered something that none of the world's leaders could have predicted. A single human, a man with no special abilities, could become the spark that ignited a rebellion. But there was still a long road ahead, and the aliens weren't done with humanity yet. The leader of the Zitharians, the one who had mocked Earth's fragile inhabitants, was about to learn that underestimating humanity would be her greatest mistake. The streets of New York City were a war zone, the once bustling metropolis now reduced to rubble and smoke. The Zitharians had come from the stars, their sleek ships hanging ominously in the skies like predatory birds. Every street corner, every rooftop was watched. There was no escaping their gaze, and for humanity, there was nowhere to hide. Jackson Moore stood atop a crumbled building, his eyes scanning the destruction around him. It had been 3 days since the Zitharians made their grand entrance. The world's defenses had crumbled quickly. What little military resistance had existed was now nothing but ash, their fighter jets shot down like flies. Even the world's most powerful governments had been rendered powerless, their leaders captured or slain, and yet humanity had not given up. Not completely. Jackson gripped his rifle tighter as he turned and headed back down into the underground bunker. Inside, a small but growing group of survivors gathered, soldiers, engineers, scientists, and ordinary people like Jackson, all united by one common goal: survival. "We need to act," Jackson said, his voice low but filled with determination. "The Zitharians won't stop until they've wiped us off the map. We can't keep waiting for a miracle. We need to take the fight to them." He had spent the last few days running with small resistance cells, gathering intel, and learning as much as he could about the invaders. The aliens were efficient, almost mechanical in their approach, but Jackson knew there had to be a way to defeat them. A man named Lucas, a former military strategist, stepped forward. "We've been preparing for this moment," he said, pulling up a digital map of the city. "The Zitharians have a command center here." He pointed to a structure several blocks away, an imposing black tower that seemed to hum with energy. "We believe it houses their leadership. If we can infiltrate it, maybe, just maybe, we can disrupt their control." Jackson nodded. It was a bold move. If they could take down the leadership, perhaps the invaders would crumble, but he knew it wouldn't be easy. "How do we get there?" he asked. "Stealth," Lucas said simply. "We have to move through the city, Avoid detection. We strike at night. Their forces are spread thin right now, but they're still watching us. The plan was risky. Jackson had never been one for tactics. He was just an ordinary mechanic after all. But something in him had changed since that first encounter with the alien warriors. He'd learned that humans weren't weak. Far from it. They had a resilience, a survival instinct that the Zetharians hadn't accounted for. That night, the team set out. Jackson, Lucas, and 5 others crept through the darkened streets, avoiding the patrols of the Zetharian forces. The alien warriors were relentless, their armored suits glowing in the night. They patrolled the streets in groups, moving like silent shadows, their weapons always at the ready. Every step Jackson took felt like an eternity, the tension thick in the air. Every corner they turned, every alley they entered, was fraught with danger. But somehow they made it to the building. The Zetharian command center loomed ahead, its walls slick and dark, almost organic in appearance. "We're in," Lucas whispered, breathing a sigh of relief. "Now, we just need to find a way in." The building had no windows, but the entrance was guarded by 2 massive Zetharian soldiers. Jackson and Lucas exchanged a glance. This was it. They had to move quickly. Jackson moved silently, his heart pounding in his chest. He wasn't a soldier. He wasn't trained for this kind of fight. But the stakes were too high. He had no choice. As the 2 guards stood facing away from the entrance, Jackson signaled to his team. In one swift motion they lunged, knocking the guards unconscious before they could react. They dragged the unconscious bodies into the shadows, and Jackson quickly keyed in a code to the door, gaining access. The interior of the building was eerily quiet. The walls were made of smooth metallic surfaces that seemed to pulse with an unnatural energy. They moved cautiously through the halls, avoiding patrols as they went deeper into the heart of the command center. They reached the central chamber. There at the far end of the room was a massive holographic display showing live feeds of different parts of the planet. The Zetharians were watching everything, coordinating their attacks with precision. "This is it," Lucas whispered, a smile forming on his face. "We've found the heart of their operation." Jackson's mind raced. If they could disrupt this system, they could send the invaders into disarray. He looked around the room, eyes darting from one console to the next. There had to be a way to sabotage their systems. But just as he was about to make his move, a voice echoed through the room. "Did you really think you could just waltz in here and destroy everything?" The voice was cold, cutting through the silence like a blade. Jackson froze. He turned to see her, a figure silhouetted against the dim lights. The alien leader stood in the doorway, her glowing red eyes fixed on him. She was tall, regal, and terrifying, her armor sleek and almost alive with a faint pulsing light. "You must be Jackson Moore," she said, her voice laced with amusement. "The human who thinks he can change the course of history. How quaint." Jackson's heart hammered in his chest, but he didn't back down. He had no choice now but to face her. "I don't need to change history," he said, his voice steady. "I just need to give humanity a fighting chance." She laughed, a harsh, cruel sound. "You are nothing. Your people are nothing. You are mere insects to us. We will crush you, like we have crushed so many other civilizations before." Jackson's mind raced. There had to be a way out of this. He glanced at Lucas, who was already moving to the consoles. Suddenly, the room went dark. A deep, guttural hum filled the air, and Jackson felt his skin prickle. Something was happening. "Do you feel that?" Jackson asked, his voice urgent. Before anyone could respond, the walls around them began to pulse with a dark energy. The holographic screens flickered, then died, one by one. The alien leader's expression shifted from arrogance to alarm. "No, this can't be," she muttered, her eyes widening. "Looks like I'm not the only one who knows how to sabotage your tech," Jackson said, a smirk forming on his lips. Lucas had done it. He had found a way to disrupt the Zitharian systems. But it wasn't enough. The alien leader stepped forward, her eyes blazing with fury. "You may have damaged our systems, but you are still nothing. You will fall, like all the others." Before Jackson could react, she lunged, her hand crackling with energy. The air around them vibrated, the temperature rising. But Jackson wasn't going down without a fight. In one swift movement, he dove behind a console, narrowly avoiding her strike. His hands fumbled for anything that could give him an advantage. Then he saw it, a small device, no bigger than a grenade, tucked into the corner of the console. Without thinking, he grabbed it, pulled the pin, and hurled it toward the alien leader. The device exploded in a burst of light and sound, temporarily blinding her. For just a moment, the alien leader staggered back, her glowing eyes dimming. It was their chance. The blast from the device wasn't enough to destroy the alien leader, but it had given Jackson and his team a precious moment of reprieve. The leader staggered back, her glowing eyes flickering like a malfunctioning light, and Jackson knew they had to move fast. "Go!" he yelled, his voice sharp with urgency. Lucas was already on his feet, gesturing for the others to follow. They dashed toward the exit, weaving through the flickering hallways of the Zitharian command center. The building, now in chaos, was starting to rumble beneath their feet. The energy surges in the walls seemed to grow more violent, as if the whole structure was reacting to the disruption. Jackson didn't dare look back. He could hear the alien leader's enraged roar echoing through the building as she regained her bearings. She wasn't going to let them escape so easily, and as they reached the outer doors of the command center, they burst out into the open air, but the sounds of battle outside were deafening. The Zitharians had dispatched reinforcements to the streets, and their warrior women were tearing through the human resistance like a knife through butter. "Jackson, we can't stay here," Lucas shouted over the noise. "We've got to move, now." Jackson nodded, his mind racing. He could hear the rapid thuds of armored feet on the pavement, and the air was filled with the crackling of energy weapons. The resistance had been pushed back, but they weren't giving up. They were scattered, but they were still fighting. Jackson's team darted into the shadows, their mission now taking on an even more desperate urgency. They couldn't afford to let the Zitharians regain control of their command center, not when they were so close to finding a way to defeat them. "Everyone fall back to the safe house," Jackson ordered, his voice steady but filled with resolve. "We need to regroup and figure out what the hell just happened." As they made their way through the dark streets, Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The blast in the command center had disrupted the Zitharian systems, but the alien leader's words still echoed in his mind. "You are nothing. Your people are nothing." Why had she said that? The contempt in her voice wasn't just because they were invaders. It was as if she knew something about humanity that he didn't, something important, and that wasn't the only thing bothering him. The building had been a fortress, and the fact that they had been able to infiltrate it so easily didn't sit right. There had to be more to the Zitharians' invasion than just taking over Earth. Why were they targeting humanity in particular? Jackson's thoughts were interrupted as they reached the safe house, a small, fortified building in the heart of the city, hidden in plain sight. Inside, the air was thick with tension. The team hurried in, and Jackson slammed the door behind them, sealing it shut. "Get the systems online," Jackson ordered, as Lucas and another member of the team rushed to the computers. "We need to know what we're up against. I want answers." The room was dimly lit, the only illumination coming from the faint glow of monitors as the team members began working. The walls were lined with blueprints, maps, and tech salvaged. From the wreckage of the Zitharian command center, Jackson took a seat in the corner, his mind still churning with questions. His hands were shaking, the adrenaline still coursing through his veins, but his mind was clearer now. This wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about figuring out what the Zitharians truly wanted and how to stop them. Hours passed, and Jackson had barely moved. He had spent most of the time pacing, trying to make sense of the fragments of information they had. The team had hacked into the Zitharian network, retrieving a treasure trove of encrypted data. They had learned a lot about the aliens' technology, but there were still too many pieces missing. Finally, Lucas looked up from the console, his face pale. "Jackson," he said, his voice tight with disbelief. "You need to see this." Jackson walked over quickly, his heart in his throat. Lucas had pulled up a set of coordinates that led to a hidden facility deep within the Arctic Circle. "What is this?" Jackson asked, his voice low. "It's a Zitharian research facility," Lucas said. "But here's the kicker. This facility isn't just a military base, it's a genetic research lab." Jackson frowned. "Genetics? What does that have to do with anything?" Lucas hesitated before continuing. "The Zitharians, they've been experimenting on human DNA." Jackson's mind reeled. "What?" "I think the invasion isn't just about resources or power," Lucas said. "It's about us, about humanity." Suddenly, everything clicked. The Zitharians had never viewed humanity as a threat because of their military strength. They'd seen them as a resource, as raw material for their genetic experiments. "That's why they keep calling us insects," Jackson muttered. "They think we're inferior, but they're harvesting us like crops, experimenting on our DNA, trying to enhance themselves by blending us with their own species." Lucas nodded grimly. "Exactly, and that's not all. They've been trying to create a super-soldier hybrid, something that combines their strength with human ingenuity. But the experiments have been disastrous." Jackson's blood ran cold. "Disastrous? What happened?" "We don't know all the details yet," Lucas said, typing quickly. "But there's a warning in the files. It looks like they've created something dangerous, a hybrid that's gone rogue. And they've lost control of it." The implications were staggering. The Zitharians had been manipulating human DNA for a purpose far beyond just taking over Earth. They had been creating weapons, super soldiers that could potentially turn the tide of any war, and one of them was out there, somewhere. The team worked tirelessly through the night, trying to piece together more information, but every minute that passed seemed to heighten the sense of urgency. They had discovered too much, more than they were supposed to know. The Zitharians would stop at nothing to keep their secrets hidden. "Jackson," Lucas said, breaking the silence, "there's something else." Jackson looked up. "What is it?" "It's a profile, a human subject," Lucas said. "She's been genetically altered. She's powerful, more powerful than anything we've ever encountered. And according to the files, she's been sent to track us down." Jackson felt a chill run down his spine. A human soldier, but one of them. The realization hit him like a ton of bricks. The Zitharians had created a weapon, a human who had been altered to hunt her own kind. Jackson's thoughts raced. How could they fight something like that? A human raised and trained by the Zitharians, who would know every weakness humanity had. The door to the safe house suddenly slammed open, and the team froze. A figure stood in the doorway, her silhouette, casting a long shadow in the dim light. It was her, the hybrid, and she was coming for them. The hybrid stood in the doorway, her silhouette sharp against the flickering light of the safe house. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. The rest of the team, hidden in the shadows, held their breath. Jackson could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the room suddenly far too small, the air far too thick. This was the moment he had been dreading. The hybrid wasn't just an enemy, they were human like him. But she wasn't human at all, not anymore. The Zitharians had twisted her, turned her into something other than what she had once been. She was a weapon, an abomination. Jackson's mind raced. What happened to her? What had they done? Her eyes, glowed a fierce yellow, almost molten, and the faint hum of electricity charged the air around her. She was tall, her body sleek and muscular, her features sharp like a predator. There was no sign of hesitation or fear in her movements, just cold, calculating precision. "You're Jackson Moore, aren't you?" Her voice was calm, eerie, and almost mechanical. Jackson didn't answer. He knew better than to engage her in conversation. There was no human left in her, only a monster created by the Zitharians' experiments. Her eyes narrowed. "I've been sent to eliminate you. The ones who have been causing disruptions, killing my people. I will stop you." Jackson swallowed hard, trying to think clearly. He had no idea how to fight someone like her. The Zitharians had designed her for one purpose: destruction. She had been made to hunt, to track, to kill. And now she was standing in front of them, ready to do just that. "Lucas," Jackson whispered, his voice tight with urgency. "Do we have any options?" Lucas didn't look up from the console. "I don't know. If she's anything like the files suggest, she's beyond anything we've faced." "Jackson," the hybrid said again, stepping further into the room. Her movements were fluid, almost predatory. "I'm not here for conversation. This ends now." Without warning, she lunged toward Jackson. The room exploded into chaos. Jackson barely had time to react, instinctively diving to the side as the hybrid's fist smashed into the wall where he had been standing a moment before. The force of the blow cracked the concrete, sending a shockwave of dust and debris flying. He scrambled to his feet, heart hammering, and pulled his weapon from his belt. The hybrid didn't pause. She was already advancing, moving with an unnatural speed. Her eyes locked onto him like a hawk's gaze on its prey. Jackson raised his gun, but he knew it was useless. He had no training in combat like the soldiers in the Resistance. His hands were shaking as he tried to aim. He couldn't let her get any closer. Just as she was about to strike, a loud noise rang through the room, a burst of gunfire. But it wasn't Jackson who had fired. Lucas stood across the room, holding an energy weapon that hummed with power. The shot struck the hybrid, but it barely fazed her. She didn't even flinch. "Damn it," Lucas cursed, stepping back. "She's impervious to normal weapons." Jackson's mind was racing. He had to think. There had to be something, anything that could stop her. Then a thought hit him. "Wait!" Jackson shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. "Her weaknesses, they're in the files we found. There's got to be something we missed." Lucas looked at him, his expression desperate. "It's not just about weaknesses, Jackson. She's enhanced. Whatever the Zitharians did to her, it's beyond anything we've ever encountered." But Jackson wasn't listening anymore. He remembered something that had been buried. In the data they'd hacked from the Zitharian network, one sentence had stood out among all the other technical jargon. Human hybrid. Weakness to extreme cold exposure. Cold. Jackson's eyes darted around the room, searching for anything that could give him the advantage. He spotted it, the old refrigeration unit in the corner. It was small, but it could work. "Lucas, the refrigeration unit! Freeze her!" Jackson shouted. Lucas's eyes widened as he understood what Jackson meant. Without hesitation, he dashed toward the unit, throwing open its door and pulling out the canisters of liquid nitrogen stored inside. The hybrid was too focused on Jackson to notice, and with a sharp cry of exertion, Lucas sprayed the liquid nitrogen directly at the hybrid. The effect was immediate. The hybrid screamed, a sound that was half human, half alien, as the cold rushed over her. Her body froze, her movements sluggish, and for the first time she looked vulnerable, but only for a moment. She roared, her yellow eyes flashing with fury, and she started to regain control. The liquid nitrogen wasn't enough to stop her completely, but it had slowed her down. "We need more," Lucas yelled. "She won't stay down for long." Jackson didn't wait for permission. He grabbed another canister of liquid nitrogen and ran toward the hybrid, spraying her again, aiming for her joints and exposed skin. The hybrid faltered, and for the first time Jackson could see a crack in her formidable exterior. But just as victory seemed within reach, the hybrid's body jerked, violently and with an inhuman growl. She broke free of the icy prison. The cold was having an effect. She was slowing, but she was still incredibly strong. She turned on them with the fury of a beast cornered. "No more," she shouted, her voice filled with raw anger. "You will not stop me." Jackson's heart raced, but something inside him clicked. He realized that they couldn't keep running, couldn't keep fighting in small, insignificant bursts. They needed to take the fight to the Zitharians, to their control center, where they could find a way to destroy their systems once and for all. "Lucas," Jackson said, his voice steady despite the chaos around him, "we don't stop until we bring them down. This is the only way." The hybrid lunged forward, her claws extended, but Jackson and his team were ready. They fought with everything they had left, every ounce of strength, every bit of desperation. But as strong as they were, the hybrid was stronger. She blocked Jackson's attacks effortlessly and sent him crashing into a wall with a single blow. The air was knocked out of him, and he gasped for breath, his vision swimming. The hybrid turned, her gaze toward him, but this time Jackson wasn't going to back down. He pushed himself off the ground, fueled by a surge of adrenaline. His team was still fighting, but they were losing ground. The hybrid was almost too powerful to defeat. But then something unexpected happened. A loud crack echoed through the room as the door to the safe house flew open. Standing in the doorway was another figure, tall and imposing, one of the Zitharians, but unlike any they had encountered before. His armor was different, sleeker, and he radiated an authority that was undeniable. The hybrid hesitated, her eyes narrowing at the newcomer. "Enough," the Zitharian said in a deep, commanding voice. "She belongs to us." Jackson's blood ran cold. This was the moment. This was what they had been fighting for. They weren't just fighting a rogue hybrid. They were fighting an entire system, an empire that viewed humanity as nothing more than a tool to be manipulated and discarded. And now Jackson understood the real stakes. The figure standing in the doorway was tall, towering over Jackson and his team. He wasn't like the others they had fought, the hybrid or the warrior women who had taken Earth by storm. This Zitharian was different. His armor shimmered with an aura of authority, sleek and black, with a dark metallic sheen that made him appear almost like a shadow. His eyes, red and glowing, burned with an intensity that sent a chill down Jackson's spine. For a moment, there was only silence. The hybrid, half human, half Zitharian, stood still, her movement stiff, her expression unreadable. She turned her gaze toward the new arrival. The anger in her eyes was palpable, but there was something else too, recognition. "You," she growled, her voice hoarse. "What do you want?" The Zitharian did not flinch. "She is mine to command, not yours," he said, his voice cold and devoid of any emotion. "This mission was never yours to complete." Jackson felt the tension rise in the room. The hybrid's whole demeanor shifted. The disdain in her eyes turned into something else, something darker, almost fearful. "Zorath," the hybrid said, her voice cracking, "you don't control me. You never did." Zorath, as Jackson now understood, was the leader, and he was not. "Pleased, you were a failure," Zorath said calmly, stepping into the room. "And now you've allowed yourself to be defeated by mere humans. You're useless." Jackson didn't know who Zorath was or what his role was in the Zitharian hierarchy, but it was clear now that this was a far more dangerous enemy than any of the others they had faced. The hybrid was a weapon, but Zorath, he was the mastermind. The hybrid snarled. "I'm not useless," she hissed. "I'm the reason Earth is still standing. You failed, Zorath interrupted, his voice slicing through her words. Like a blade. Your weakness brought us to this point. You have no purpose anymore. The room was thick with tension, but Jackson, despite the growing sense of dread, couldn't help but feel a flicker of hope. The hybrid wasn't entirely loyal. To the Zitharians, there was conflict within their ranks, cracks in the armor. "Jackson," Lucas whispered urgently, pulling him aside, "we have a shot. If we can divide them, if we can break their unity, there might be a chance to take them both down." Jackson glanced back at Zorath and the hybrid. "How?" he muttered. "Disrupt their communication," Lucas said. "Get them distracted long enough. We can take them both down." Jackson nodded, his mind spinning. The hybrid was powerful, there was no question about it. But if she could be manipulated, if she was vulnerable to division, it could work. But first, they had to survive long enough to try. Zorath raised his hand, and the air seemed to charge with energy. Jackson instinctively took a step back. The Zitharian leader's power was palpable, like the weight of a storm about to break. "You think you can stop us?" Zorath's voice boomed, the anger now clear. "You think your pitiful resistance can match the might of the Zitharians?" "We'll see," Jackson said, his voice tight but resolute. With that, Zorath lunged forward, his speed almost inhuman. His fist collided with the ground where Jackson had been standing, and the impact sent shockwaves through the room, cracking the concrete beneath them. Jackson was thrown backward, crashing into a wall. His body ached, his breath coming in ragged gasps, but he was still alive. That was the most important thing. The hybrid stood, her eyes flickering between Zorath and the team. She looked confused, her loyalty torn. She glanced back at Zorath, her expression unreadable. "Don't get in my way," Zorath snapped. The hybrid hesitated, but she didn't move to stop him. Instead, she stepped back, her eyes darkened, as though grappling with something much deeper than the immediate fight. For a split second, Jackson saw the opportunity. "Lucas!" he shouted. "Now!" Lucas, standing near the back of the room, activated a device he had been working on, something they had stolen from the Zitharians' tech. The device hummed to life, sending out a pulse that scrambled the Zitharian communication. "Systems," Zorath froze, his head jerking to the side as he realized what had just happened. The energy in the room shifted, and the moment of uncertainty was enough. "Now!" Jackson yelled. The team acted fast, launching into action. Jackson grabbed a nearby pipe and charged toward Zorath. Lucas fired the energy weapon he had modified, aiming for the weak points in Zorath's armor. They had to strike hard and fast. This was their only shot. Zorath reeled back, his armor crackling as the energy blast struck him. He growled in fury, his red eyes burning like twin coals. "You think you can defeat me?" Zorath roared. "I am the architect of this invasion. Before he could finish, Jackson swung the pipe with all his might, landing a blow to the side of Zorath's head. The Zitharian staggered, but his strength was overwhelming. With a single swipe of his hand, he sent Jackson flying, crashing into a pile of debris. The hybrid, who had been standing idly by, finally stepped forward. Her expression cold. She turned to face Zorath, and for the first time Jackson saw a flicker of something human in her eyes. "You are wrong," she said, her voice softer but filled with anger. "You've made mistakes. You underestimated them." "You underestimated me?" Zorath turned to face her, his expression furious. "You're still a failure." "I was never a failure," the hybrid replied, her eyes flashing with defiance. "But you are." With one swift motion, she turned and attacked. Zorath barely had time to react before the hybrid's enhanced strength slammed into him. She threw him to the ground, her fists pounding into his chest with a force that was enough to crack the floor beneath them. Jackson, dazed and disoriented, struggled to get back on his feet. He could see the struggle unfolding between the two Zitharians. This was their moment. The hybrid was no longer the enemy. "Do it now!" Jackson shouted. Lucas, without missing a beat, activated another pulse from their tech, sending a surge of energy directly into Zorath's suit. The shock caused Zorath to convulse, his body jerking as the armor systems overloaded. With a final, desperate scream, Zorath collapsed to the ground, his body twitching from the energy feedback. Jackson breathed heavily, his chest heaving as he wiped the sweat from his brow. He couldn't believe it. They had done it. The hybrid stood over Zorath's defeated form, her chest rising and falling with exertion. For a long moment, she didn't speak. The room was silent, except for the distant sounds of the ongoing battle outside. Finally, she turned toward Jackson and his team, her expression unreadable. "I don't know what happens next," she said quietly, "but I know that I can't be the weapon they made me to be anymore. I have my own choices to make." Jackson nodded slowly. He didn't know what her future held, but for now, she had helped them achieve the impossible. The tide had turned. The world wasn't safe yet. The battle raged on outside. But for the first time since the Zitharians had arrived, Jackson felt hope, a glimmer of light in the darkness. But the war wasn't over. Not yet. The battle for Earth had reached its zenith. The Zitharian invasion had shaken the planet to its core. For days, humanity had fought tooth and nail against an unstoppable enemy, their world crumbling under the weight of an advanced, ruthless force. But now, standing amidst the wreckage, Jackson Moore and the survivors of the human resistance could see the faintest glimmer of hope. The alien leader Zorath had been defeated, and with it a crucial part of the invaders' leadership had fallen. The hybrid warrior, once an enemy, had turned against her creators, her humanity resurfacing in a defiant act of rebellion. But the war was far from over. The Zitharians were still here, their forces still scattered across the globe, and there was no guarantee that humanity's victory would be secured. The true test had yet to come. Jackson stood in the makeshift command center, surrounded by the remnants of the resistance. His hands were still covered in dirt and blood, his body sore from the countless battles he'd fought, but his resolve had never been stronger. The hybrid, who had once been their most dangerous enemy, was now an uneasy ally. Her name was Ellis, and though her past was filled with violence and manipulation, she had made the choice to fight for humanity's survival. Her transformation from a tool of destruction to a symbol of defiance had become the turning point of the war. But even with their victory over Zorath, the final confrontation with the remaining Zitharian forces loomed ahead. "We're running out of time," Lucas said, his voice tight with urgency as he glanced over the digital map of Earth displayed on the holographic screen in front of them. "The Zitharians aren't just going to retreat. They've already begun regrouping." Jackson didn't respond immediately. His mind was elsewhere, on the people he'd lost, on the cities that had fallen. But most of all, his thoughts were on the strange, broken alliance between him and Ellis. The two of them had come a long way from being enemies. But what came next? Could humanity, with all its flaws, really defeat an empire like the Zitharians? "Jackson," Lucas repeated, his voice pulling Jackson back to reality. "What's the plan?" Jackson sighed, his hands resting on the table as he stared at the map. They had to end this. There was no other choice. He couldn't bear the thought of watching more innocent lives be destroyed by an enemy that saw them as nothing but pests. "We need to strike at the heart of their operations," Jackson said, his voice resolute. "We've taken out their leader, but there's still a massive force out there. We need to disable their command centers, their technology. We have to disrupt their ability to fight." Ellis, who had been standing quietly in the corner, her arms crossed, spoke up. "The Zitharians won't back down unless we take out their communications. They rely on their systems to stay connected. Without that, they'll fall apart." Jackson turned to her, the wariness between them beginning to soften. She was right. The Zitharians were a highly organized force, and if they could sever their communication and supply lines, they might just be able to turn the tide completely. Do you have any intel on their main communication hubs? Jackson asked. Ellis nodded. There's a facility deep in the desert, the heart of their operations. It's a communications relay and data center. If we take it out, it will send a shockwave through their entire network. The Zitharians won't be able to coordinate their forces anymore, but it won't be easy. The place is heavily guarded. Jackson's eyes narrowed as he considered the plan. It was risky, too risky, but it was the only chance they had left. They had to strike while the Zitharians were still vulnerable, while they were still reeling from Zorath's death. How long do we have before they regroup? Jackson asked. Not long, Ellis replied. Their remaining leaders are already beginning to mobilize. If we wait too long, we'll lose our window of opportunity. Jackson turned to Lucas. Get our team ready. We move out in 2 hours. We hit the facility hard and fast. No hesitation. The resistance had spent years surviving in the shadows, but now they were about to take the fight to the Zitharians in full force. The desert was a vast, empty wasteland, but it held the key to their future. Jackson knew that if they didn't act now, the Zitharians would turn their attention back to Earth cities, and humanity would never stand a chance. As Jackson and the rest of the team geared up, the weight of the mission settled heavily on his shoulders. This was it, the final stand. The decision he made now would decide the fate of Earth. But in the back of his mind, Jackson couldn't help but feel the sting of his earlier doubts. Could humanity really stand up to the might of the Zitharians? Or had they simply gotten lucky? We've got one shot, Lucas said as they boarded the transport ship. Let's make it count. Jackson nodded, the cockpit lights flickering as the ship took off into the sky. The mission had begun. Hours later, they arrived at the Zitharian facility, a massive complex, buried deep in the desert. It stood like a monument to their invasion, a symbol of their arrogance. The towering walls of the facility loomed over them, an imposing structure of metal and stone. But Jackson wasn't afraid. He had no time for fear. He had no choice but to fight. Approaching target, Lucas called out as the transport ship descended toward the landing zone. We've got about 5 minutes before their sensors pick us up. Jackson and the rest of the team readied their weapons, checking their gear one final time. Ellis, who had been quiet for most of the journey, looked at Jackson one last time. I won't be the one who finishes this, she said, her voice soft but determined. I'm here to help, but this fight is yours. Jackson nodded, understanding her meaning. She had already given everything. Her humanity, her past, her loyalty. The final blow, whatever it was, had to come from a human hand. It had to come from Earth. They landed just outside the facility's walls, and the team quickly disembarked. Jackson led the way, his feet heavy with the weight of what was to come. The facility's security was tight. The Zitharians weren't foolish. They had set up layers of defense around their most critical asset, but Jackson and his team had the element of surprise on their side. They infiltrated the complex, moving quickly and silently, taking out patrols and bypassing security checkpoints. As they moved deeper into the heart of the facility, Jackson's thoughts remained focused. They were close, very close. They reached the central communications hub, a massive room filled with advanced technology and alien machinery. The air was thick with tension, the walls humming with an eerie energy. The heart of the Zitharian Empire was just within reach. Place the charges, Jackson ordered, his voice steady but urgent. Lucas and Ellis moved quickly, setting the explosives in key locations around the room. The countdown had begun. They had minutes, just minutes, before the charges detonated. But as they worked, the doors to the facility slammed open with a violent force. A group of Zitharian warriors, heavily armed and determined, poured into the room, their weapons raised. Jackson's heart sank. They had been too slow. The Zitharians had found them. The battle erupted. Jackson and his team fought with everything they had. The Zitharians were relentless, But the human resistance was fueled by something more powerful, something that the aliens could never understand. The will to survive, to fight for the future of their species, burned bright in their hearts. Ellis, her enhanced strength, making her an unstoppable force, tore through the alien warriors with fury. Jackson, his body battered and bruised from countless encounters, still fought with an intensity that seemed to come from deep within. His team was with him, side by side, never wavering. Finally, with one last push, they overcame the last of the Zitharian forces. The countdown clock reached its final seconds, and with a deafening explosion, the communications hub was destroyed. The room fell silent. The fight was over. Outside, the last remnants of the Zitharian forces began to crumble. With their communications severed, their command structure shattered, the invaders were left in disarray. Their grip on Earth was broken. Humanity had triumphed. The days that followed were filled with chaos, but also with a new hope. Earth was free. The Zitharians had been defeated, and the remnants of their empire had been scattered to the far reaches of the universe. Jackson stood in the ruins of the facility, looking out over the barren desert. The world was forever changed, but humanity had survived. They had fought back against an unstoppable force and emerged victorious. As he turned to leave, he glanced over at Ellis, standing in the distance. She had been part of the resistance, but she wasn't human, not anymore. She had found her own path, and though she would never be truly one of them, she had helped save humanity. In the end, the lesson was clear. Humanity's greatest strength wasn't in its technology, its weapons, or its power. It was in its resilience, its ability to fight even when the odds were impossible, and in the courage to stand up, no matter how overwhelming the enemy. And that, Jackson realized, was what had ultimately saved them. The end.